Okay, folks, I think we're going to get going. I just want to make sure we're recording, and we are. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rory O'Neill, and I'm the Alumni Director here at John Carroll. Welcome to our next installment of the Alumni Continuing Education Series, also known as ACES. If I didn't mention previously, I apologize. I'm a proud member of the class of 2006, and I've been the Alumni Director for about a year now. We're so happy for you to join us this evening for our program titled JCU in the Lottery. The Alumni Continuing Education Series was established in the spring of 2013 by the Office of Alumni Relations here at John Carroll. And it was established because two things are true about John Carroll alums. They have a zest for lifelong learning and knowledge, and they like to stay engaged with their alma mater. So this program was designed to provide enrichment opportunities for alumni and friends, and through expertise provided by John Carroll faculty, staff, our administration, and tonight, members of the John Carroll alumni community. So just some housekeeping here to begin. We encourage you to view this program in full screen mode. Tonight's program is a webinar, so none of the guests should be visible on the screen or have access to their audio being picked up. So please, wherever you're enjoying tonight's program, enjoy, relax where you are this evening. Following our moderated conversation, we will have the opportunity for questions and answers from both our moderator and our evening's guests. So you can ask those at any time utilizing the chat function at the bottom. We'll be curating those questions throughout the evening, so please do ask them as we go along, and we'll be happy to ask them at the end. Okay. But before we kind of begin the program, for those who have not engaged with John Carroll in a while, have not been on our campus in some time, I just want to provide a quick update on all the fun things that are happening at the university. If you were to walk from one side of campus to the other, you would see visible signs of John Carroll's progress and all the momentum happening on campus. If you were to start in the Dolan Science Center, you would see new high fidelity and low fidelity nursing labs supported by our nursing supporters, the Nader Family Foundation. You were to walk by Griselli Library, you would see a big construction zone because the library is undergoing a 2 to 3 year, multi-million dollar and multi-floor renovation. Once you step inside the finished product, you won't recognize the space you're in, and even some of the outside visible signs will be very different as well. If you were to walk onto the quad, you would see Dolan and Pacelli halls. If you were to look at them from the outside, nothing would look different. They're as beautiful as they've ever been outside visibly. But inside, you'd find new walls, new paint, some renovated new rooms, a new elevator shaft behind both of them. And I can't believe I'm saying this, we finally have air conditioning in these historic dorms. So we're kind of spoiling these kids these days. And then if you were to walk into the DJ Lombard Student Center, you would see a brand new atrium, fully renovated, the bookstore with a smaller footprint, a new coffee shop. What was once a pass-through area of campus is now one of the biggest hubs for our students to gather and get together and study and get together for social activities. You would then look at the Belvoir parking lot. You would see the Athletic Wellness and Events Center, which is going to be a $60 million indoor recreation space coming from the ashes. There's steel being put up this week. And then if you were to go to the outside Shula Stadium, starting in May, you'll see brand new artificial turf being put into the athletic complex that houses Schweikert Field and Bracken Field. On the academic front, we have a new College of Health. We have beefed up programs in engineering, physics, interreligious understanding, and dialogue, which is very important given current events these days. And starting next in 2025, the athletic department has made the decision to join the North Coast Athletic Conference, which will position John Carroll with other national universities like Oberlin, Denison, and Kenyon. So there is lots to be proud of happening at John Carroll, and there's lots to be happening, a lot of exciting developments. But just as there's always exciting developments happening here at John Carroll, there's always exciting things happening amongst our alumni, and that's why we're here tonight. So I want to share a little bit of why we're doing tonight's program to feature Michelle, John, and Mark. So whether you are for the state lottery, against the state lottery, into gambling, into gaming, against even things as simple as the bingo or any other organized form of legalized gambling or gaming, we have to recognize its place in American society, and more importantly, their importance to state lottery systems and our education system, okay? Just take Michelle and the state of Ohio's lottery system. Since, created in 1973, since that date, it is funded, I'm going to get this number right, $31 billion in support to K through 12 education programs. And I'm sure with John and Maryland and Mark in North Carolina, there are similar staggering numbers to provide there as well. Add in the fact that sports gambling has become more accessible and legalized across many states, and the regulation of these systems becomes more of a monumental task. It requires both strong leadership, but also talented individuals to lead those systems. And enter Mark, John, and Michelle. Each of their Carroll stories is as unique and as impressive as they are, and their careers are great examples of blue streaks who've done well, but also who do it the right way. So tonight we're going to hear from them on their John Carroll experience, learn a little bit about what their jobs are like, and hear a discussion on some of the inner workings of state lottery systems and some of the challenges they face today. Now, before I introduce our panel and our co-host here, John, Mark, and Michelle are not the first alums to do it big in the lottery. They are not the first ones to run a state lottery system. Years ago, there was an alum from the class of '69 named Arch Gleason. Arch Gleason sadly passed away in 2016, but he spent 23 years as the head of the Kentucky lottery system. And at the time of his passing, he had served the longest in any state lottery system than anyone else in the country. I want to read a little bit from his obituary here. He was brought in at the beginning of his tenure in Kentucky to clean up the state lottery system of Kentucky. And after he retired and departed that position, he led a scandal-free and uneventful tenure in terms of the state lottery increased its capabilities, education programs got funded, and he became known as a very ethical man in gaming, right? And he started ethical gaming operations in the state of Kentucky, which have since been replicated in other state lottery systems that Mark, John, and Michelle run today. I want to add just two little anecdotes about Arch Gleason, which are important to know because it's a great indication of John Carroll alumni doing well. He openly kept his phone number in the phone book back in the day because he wanted people to be able to call him if they had questions about the gaming operation or simple questions about how a lottery works. He also used to get invited to graduation parties for kids who received scholarships from the Kentucky Lottery. He was invited to these parties and he would go to them because he wanted to give back and show how present he was. So with that in mind, I want to introduce our panelists tonight. First, I want to introduce Mark Michalko. Mark, if you could raise your hand real quick.
Hello.
Mark is from the class of '76. He's got a degree in political science. He's an Ohio native whose lottery experience has taken him all over the world. He's served as the founding executive director of the California Lottery. Then he ran the first ever lottery system in the Philippines. He's also had gigs with private companies taking him to Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, and even was in Macau at one point. And since 2018, he's been the executive director of the North Carolina Lottery. And this is something I strive to in my life. He's a member of the Lottery Industry Hall of Fame. So congratulations, Mark, and thank you for being here this evening. Next up is John Martin from the class of '78. John's got a degree in communications at John Carroll. He works as the deputy director of, he worked as the deputy director of sales management for the Ohio Lottery System Commission before moving to Baltimore, Maryland to work for the Maryland Lottery System. And he started as the assistant director in 2011. And then in 2015 became the managing director and chief revenue officer, supervising the state lottery system's network of 4,400 retail locations. And last on our panel is Michelle Gillcrist, who's a 1989 graduate of John Carroll. For over 30 years, Michelle has served in both public and private sectors in the economic development, healthcare, technology, and nonprofit space. She worked for then Senator Mike DeWine as the managing attorney for his Northeast Ohio office. And then in 2023, still working for now Governor Mike DeWine, became the director of the Ohio Lottery. Now, what she has on both John and Mark is that she is what I would like to call a double streak. She has an MBA from John Carroll, and she was also taught by our interviewer tonight, Dr. Andy Welke. We'll hear maybe a few tidbits about that later, Michelle. But I also like to point out what she has on most people on here is she's a Carroll couple. She met her husband, Christopher, here on campus, and she wanted me to know that and explain that. So, and then our co-interviewer tonight is going to talk more about the inner mechanics of the lottery system. Dr. Andy Welke, who received his PhD in economics from Penn State many, many years ago. He has been a campus institution for many years here at John Carroll, teaching generations of Blue Streaks. His research interests include the areas of transportation safety, sport economics, and he's won just about pretty much every faculty award you can win at John Carroll, and he is a constant presence to our students. So thank you all for joining us tonight. I want to get the panel discussion tonight started. I just want to hear everyone's Carroll story. So Mark, if you could you could start. Tell us a little bit what brought you to John Carroll, and then what your John Carroll experience was like.
Sure, happy to do that. So there's a little bit of a similarity with John here, and he'll follow up on this, I'm sure, when it's his turn. But I came to John Carroll as a transfer student, as a sophomore. My first year was at Notre Dame, and moved back to Ohio mainly, to be honest, as a financial decision. But it turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to me. I majored in political science at John Carroll, enjoyed working with the poli-sci faculty generally, and Dr. Kathleen Barber in particular. And it was really through my classes with Dr. Barber that she really inspired me to become a lawyer. which led then to my business with the Ohio Lottery, where I was a lawyer, and then my career in gaming. So it was all rather happenstance in some respects, but a lot of it was because of the inspiration from Dr. Barber and some of the faculty in the poli-sci department at John Carroll.
Very good. John, could you please explain to us how you got to University Heights and what was your John Carroll education like?
Well, as Mark said, we have some similarities. One thing that Mark did not get into is that we probably were both born and raised within 5 miles of each other in Cleveland back in the day. And yes, similarly, I went to the University of Notre Dame my freshman year, and through circumstances came back to Cleveland my sophomore year, and had a great opportunity to really explore all of campus life as best a commuter could. Back then, in that time frame, there were probably more commuters than there were on-campus students. That's clearly changed in the last few years, but enjoyed the experience nonetheless. And again, had great experiences with faculty. My degree is in communications. I thought I was going to be the next nightly news anchor, and then realized I had a face for radio, and it wasn't going to work for me on the TV front. But enjoyed the experience nonetheless. I hope Dr. Jackie Schmidt is watching, and if she is, a shout out to her for being a big inspiration to not only myself but numbers of others of us in that time frame. I had the opportunity to actually run the John Carroll radio station at that time, WUJC FM 89, where the music's on us. But a shout out to the current group, because WJCU 88.7, and I've got my notes here, Rory, the Intercollegiate Broadcasting System has named John Carroll University's radio station the #1 college radio station in the United States in the 10,000 students or less category. That's an amazing accomplishment, something we would never have dreamed of back in the 70s. So kudos to the team at WJCU, all of the men and women doing an outstanding job, and proud to be part of that legacy, as well as the lottery legacy, which I began, as you said, back in 2009 with the Ohio Lottery, moved over to Baltimore with Maryland Lottery, became the director in July of 2021, and enjoying the experience here.
Thanks for doing our PR work for us, John. We've been promoting that and on our social media channels. Are incredibly proud of the WJCU's success. It's a great radio station. So, Michelle, please tell us a little bit about what brought you to John Carroll and what your John Carroll education was like.
Well, so just like Mark and John, I too am a transfer student into Carroll in my sophomore year. I started off at the University of Toledo, and just it wasn't a right fit for me. So transferred over to John Carroll, started off as an accounting major, and had an internship with an accounting firm. Met my then boyfriend, husband now, who was a history major, got to see all of the fascinating research and writing that he was doing, and knew then that accounting was not going to be for me. So switched and became a history major, had enough classes to have a business minor, and the rest is history. Though unlike Mark and John, who have many years of lottery experience, I am just celebrating my 1-year anniversary at the Ohio Lottery. So my background is more in government work, policy work, lobbying, that type of thing.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I kind of want to transfer out of University Heights and into where you all ended up landing. But I want to ask, just because we have some students dialing in, we have some professors. We love sharing, the start of each John Carroll alum's journey. So starting with Mark again. Mark, tell us what your first job was and how that eventually led to you getting into the gaming industry.
So this is really an odd story. My first job was as a legal intern at the Ohio Lottery. So the three of us all have some connection to the Ohio Lottery. I actually went for a summer job, literally expecting to go for 3 months right before I entered law school. When I got into law school and started, I was invited to stay on part-time. And being a young person looking to get a little bit of money to save and spend on law school and hopefully a car at some point, I did stay on during my law school career. And after I graduated and passed the bar, it coincided with the Ohio Lottery's legal counsel's retirement. So they were actually looking for an attorney to stay on board. I had absolutely no intention of doing so. You know, you get out of law school and you think, I'm going to go on and Michelle will agree to this, you know, big law firm kind of thing going on. But as I was interviewing, I decided to stay on, and I stayed there for 5 years. But what was interesting was the fact that I was with the Ohio Lottery allowed me to look at other opportunities, which led to my next job in gaming, which was as the founding executive director of the California Lottery. So from there, it just snowballed into other jobs in the gaming industry, which I've been in now since, I hate to say this, 1977. So long career in gaming, but all very happenstance, starting with a legal internship at the Ohio Lottery.
Wow, amazing. John, same question to you. What got you out of the university, and then how'd you get into the gaming world?
Well, clearly back in the 70s, there wasn't a course on how to run a lottery back then at John Carroll. And maybe the times have changed. Maybe there's something more contemporary for the current undergrads, but back then that wasn't even a consideration. And as I said, I started thinking I was going to be in broadcast journalism and enjoyed that. And I did actually a few things in radio and TV, but very quickly decided, well, let me pursue a different path. And I started with the software industry and spent a number of years in software and related things like media production, special event marketing. Really had a fairly nice career ahead of me there. And then a John Carroll grad who shall remain nameless, but she knows who she is, came to me back in 2008 and said, "Hey, I think you ought to talk to the Ohio Lottery. They've got a position for a sales executive, and I think you'd be perfect for it." And I didn't think I would be perfect for it, but I looked at the job and said, "You know what? I could probably do that." And through the process, pursued that in 2008. It was basically a new career for me at the time, and I had a chance to get that job. Found out I enjoyed it. Looked for other opportunities in the industry and found the opportunity here in Baltimore. Fun fact, and you probably know this, Rory, because you're in charge of fun facts there at John Carroll, I'm sure. John Carroll, Bishop John Carroll, is from Maryland. And as many students there are well aware, matter of fact, there's a John Carroll High School here in the state of Maryland, does a great job. I'd be interested to know, here's your homework assignment, Rory. I'd be interested to know how many John Carroll High School students in Maryland actually have graduated from John Carroll University. Would you get back to us on that? Doesn't have to be today. You can just get back to us.
I'll get right to our records department, but I'm from the DC area, and there's actually a Archbishop Carroll High School in the city of the District of Columbia as well. So we can do a double thing there, right?
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. But like Mark, once you get in this industry, it kind of gets a hold of you. And I've been here now. I told my wife we'd be here for 2-3 years. It's been 12. Don't tell her that it's been 12. I hope she's not watching. But that's kind of where we are, and looking forward to a few more years before we call it quits.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. Michelle, same question. You know, what got you, what was your first job in the professional world out of John Carroll, and then how'd you get into the gaming industry?
So after I graduated from John Carroll with my BA and then master's, I went on to A.C.E.S Law School and graduated from there, and had taken an antitrust class. And the professor started talking about lobbyists and what lobbyists do and how they work on policy issues and this and that. And so I came home to my husband and I said, I think I figured out what it is that I want to do. And so I got a job at what was that now the Greater Cleveland Partnership, but then it was called the Greater Cleveland Growth Association, which is the Chamber of Commerce in Cleveland, doing federal government relations. And one of the issues that I always did advocacy for was for NASA Glenn Research Center. And at that time, Mike DeWine was a US Senator, and he was then, as he continues to be now, a very strong proponent of NASA Glenn. So I got to know his staff. His staff person in Cleveland was leaving at a certain point in time and said, "Hey, I'm leaving. I think you'd be perfect for the job to head up the Senator's Cleveland office. I think you should interview." And interviewed, got the job, and have been on Team DeWine ever since. So I got this job because the former director retired and the governor appointed me to this position about a year ago.
Okay, thank you. Well, listen, I'm going to turn it over here to Dr. Andy Walke, who's going to ask our panel here a series of questions about the inner workings of the gaming industry and each state lottery system. Dr. Walke, why don't you take it away?
Well, first, thanks to all our panelists. It's fascinating to hear the various plot twists, and it's good to know that students who come to John Carroll with a plan never live their plan. They live some other plan, and that's all good, and still become successful. But I guess I'd like to know, as a person who watches the Mega and sees these big numbers and has big dreams, I guess I'd just like to start with, tell me a little bit about how a lottery system really works. And I guess I'll start with you, Michelle. What's your understanding of how a lottery system works?
So there is the Mega group. There's a group called Muscle that runs Powerball. The Mega group runs Mega. And then you've got the Ohio Lottery, which runs our own in-state games. And so the Mega drawing is done down in Georgia. I don't know where the Powerball drawing is done exactly, but we here in Ohio actually do a drawing live several times a day for our pick numbers. I was just there at the studio today, and we were when we do the drawing, we work with the state auditor. An auditor is present to make sure that, the balls have all been properly weighed, that they've been selected from various containers that we have. So everything, there's a process to it. And it's things that people don't see on the front, but everything that has to be done meticulously on the back to make sure that the integrity of the game is there. Because if we don't have the integrity of the game, the people that play the game can't trust that what we're putting out to them is actually 100% validated, which is why we go through all of these mechanisms to do this, along with having the outside state auditor, review everything as well. So I don't know if John and Mark can, add a little bit more, because some lotteries do it what is called a random number generator, where you're not actually seeing the balls pop up, but it's all done behind the scenes with a computer that is audited to the nth degree as well.
I guess I would like to hear from the gentlemen who are a little bit longer in the tooth in the game than our newbie, as to sort of nuances that might exist in the way your states operate, because I imagine there's maybe some common things, but then some things that might be different from state to state.
John, if you don't mind, I'll jump in as the longest tooth in the panel here. I think Michelle described it accurately. The key thing for everybody to understand is a lottery is nothing if it doesn't have security and integrity. You have to absolutely have all the processes in place that people can trust the numbers that are drawn and the way the games operate. If you lose any of that sort of public trust, the games will not be successful and the lottery will fail. So I think in general terms, if you look at it from a product standpoint, because at the end of the day, we're selling a consumer product, right? It's a non-essential consumer product, but we're competing with other forms of entertainment. Let me put it that way. So the same discretionary dollars that you might have to spend on a movie or going out to dinner or whatever, some people might choose to play a lottery ticket. And then we all manage a portfolio of products. You're all familiar with the scratch-off tickets, instant scratch-offs. We have In our state, we introduce about 50 of those every year. Every month, we introduce 4 or 5 new games to keep them fresh and to get people's interest in those. And then we have some of the games that Michelle talked about, which we call draw-based games, some of which are run by national organizations like Powerball and Mega Millions, and others are in-state draw games where you actually select numbers. Much like Ohio, we do all of those drawings publicly on television with auditors present. So again, going to the issue of integrity of the games. In our state, we have one, as a few states do, we have an additional product line, which we call instant scratch-offs. So it's a way to play online. You can play on your phone, you can play on your computer, you can buy products that way, as opposed to going into retail. We just started some of that within the last 6 months. They're highly successful in our state. And again, it's designed to attract players who are either looking for more convenience and not having to drive to a retail location, or for people who are more technologically savvy, a younger group, if you will, unlike me, who like to do everything through their computer or through their phone. So I'll leave it up to John, who will undoubtedly explain that better than I did.
I don't know if that's possible, Mark. I don't know if that's possible, but I will put a different spin on it. First off, let me just, Dr. Welke addressed a different kind of question. Lotteries exist to raise revenue. Each state has their own beneficiary structure, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, I'm sure. But first and foremost, lotteries have existed for hundreds of years to generate revenue for whatever a cause happens to be. You can go back in the annals of history and find lotteries being used to fund the Great Wall of China through colonial times. Here in the colonies, lotteries were used in a various number of ways. And then more contemporary times, there's a period of time back in the 19th century when gaming and gambling just got out of control, and there was a stop to it. Matter of fact, gambling was declared illegal, and it still is illegal today, except for states who write in exceptions. And that's how lotteries were formed, again, rejuvenated in the mid-60s, New Hampshire being the first of the contemporary lotteries in 1964. It was a way to get around the gambling prohibition, except for a state lottery. And then the other states kind of looked at that and said, well, let's try that. And kind of a similar migration path to colonization, states from the New England area through the mid-Atlantic, out west, each year for the next 25 years, more and more lotteries came on board and migrated west. And that's really where the lotteries began. But as Mark and Michelle both eloquently stated, we all basically do the same thing. Yeah, there are subtle nuances. But in Maryland, we're 51st year of this year of a lottery. And the scratch-off ticket is pretty much the same as it's been for 50 years. Not a lot of variance in the technology. You put a little ticket together, you put some schmutz over the top of it, you scratch, and you find out if you're a winner. More contemporary products are things like the draw games and digital platforms. And again, we'll talk about that. So the evolutions have been pretty similar across all states and jurisdictions, and they all have a similar makeup in terms of who the beneficiaries are.
Thanks for the great historical context for us to sort of wrap our head around. In that conversation, I heard a lot of mention, well, if we go all the way back to the lead in talking about Arch Gleason, he was brought in to clean up a mess, evidently. And I guess I've heard integrity mentioned a number of times. So how do you go about make sure that ethical standards are in place up and down the organization in order for the systems to have the trust that they need to have to play the role that they play? I'll leave it to anyone in the audience. You want to start, Mark, please?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll jump in for a second here. So the industry as a whole, and I'll speak on behalf of the worldwide lottery industry because lotteries do exist in every part of the world. There's an organization called the World Lottery Association, the WLA. And they, believe it or not, they set standards for what the industry refers to as responsible gaming. And there are various levels of achievement. So if you do certain things, and you have to qualify for this, it's a process, it's a rather laborious process at that. a process where you have to submit documentation to talk about how your procedures work, how things that include what Michelle referred to, auditing of your games, how they work to make sure that everything is above board and so on. That is a standard that's done at a global level. There's also an organization called the North American Association of State and Provincial Lotteries, aka NASPL, and NASPL also has its own standards. So every lottery applies for and qualifies for some level of this certification, either from the World Lottery Association or from NASPL, that basically sets forth and certifies an individual state's compliance with these responsible gaming standards. And responsible gaming includes a lot of things, not just the fact that the games are above board and beyond reproach and all of that, but also things like how to help players play responsibly and not spend the rent money, if you will, and to play within certain parameters and limitations. And each of us approaches that slightly differently. Here in North Carolina, we're very proactive in this. We've achieved the highest level from the World Lottery Association. It's called Level 4 certification. So that's something our organization is very proud of. But we have a program called Play Smart, which basically teaches players to set limits, how to play so that you don't do something that's going to cause a problem. And we try to be proactive and teach them and give them assistance before they encounter a problem. That's the key thing. It's a very proactive sort of process. And then the other thing that we do is because some people a small percentage do create or get into some sort of a problem area, we provide funding to problem gambling services in North Carolina through the Department of Health and Human Services. So we give them about $2 million a year to help with people who actually do develop a problem. So that's kind of how we approach things in North Carolina.
Thanks.
So, yeah, so it's similar here in Ohio, and just for our audience, if most people are tuning in from Ohio, we have a department here at the Ohio Lottery that's devoted to responsible gambling, especially with sports betting coming online here in Ohio. And, a lot of kids in college, sports betting, the age gate is 21. For lottery, it's 18. But we do have two websites. One is called timeoutohio.com, and we have what's called a voluntary exclusion program. So you can actually sign up and have yourself be banned from going into a casino, a racino, a thistledown type of environment for a number of years or for a lifetime ban. And you can do that online on that website, and it would be good for all of those gaming industries in Ohio. And then looking at the younger audience that might be tuning in, we also have a website called pausebeforeyouplay.org. And that also gives a lot of tips and prevention information and resources to help people not go down that road of gambling addiction. And if you are caught up into it, where are some places that you can turn? And then the last place that we have, and many people don't think about this, but younger kids are getting taught how to gamble with a lot of these online games that they play. So there is another website that parents and grandparents might want to tune into. It's called Change the Game Ohio. And there's a lot of good tips on there about how parents, grandparents, and educators can speak to children about gaming in an age appropriate way.
Thanks, Michelle. What about your space, John?
One of the advantages, Dr. Welke, that any lottery has, I mentioned it earlier when I talked about the migratory path and the history of the evolution of lotteries is that we learn from those who have come before us. And there is a very collaborative, fraternal group among each state jurisdiction. Today, there are 45 states plus the District of Columbia that have state lotteries, and it is a very open sharing. You heard Mark talk about some of the associations we all belong to. And so when something works, it is very quickly replicated and distributed. Directors are willing and very comfortable sharing. We even talk to people who are non-John Carroll graduates, if you can believe that. We engage them in conversations as well. We just don't keep it between the three of us. But there are opportunities to learn upon it, improve upon it. I took notes here on what both of them just said to incorporate into our platforms. And that's how there's a continuity and consistency, because players need to expect that as well, that the lottery operates the same in Maryland as it does in Ohio and in North Carolina, and with some subtle differences. But for the most part, it's the same type of experience, the same standards when it comes to responsible play, the same basic statutes on the laws and the regulations on how the games are played, so that they are played fairly and across jurisdictions.
Thanks. One last question in this space before we shift gears just a little bit. You had mentioned all the certifications, Mark. Is there a way that a person could find out what the certification was for their state lottery, what level it happened to be? I don't know, just to perhaps give them a peace of mind or a comfort zone as to things.
So there are two organizations that I mentioned. One is called the World Lottery Association, or WLA, and you can go on the internet and type in World Lottery Association, and it'll take you to their website. It has tons of information. It will show you all the member jurisdictions around the world. And I think on there, John, I'm pretty sure it's correct, you can find the level of certification for each of these organizations. In North America, there's the North American Association of State and Provincial Lotteries. I know that rolls off the tongue. NASPL, NASPL. If you go on their website, again, similarly, there's a huge amount of information that people can look at, and it will undoubtedly include some of the information about the responsible gaming for each state.
Thanks for sharing that. I guess, well, we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges in the space. I guess, as was mentioned earlier, Great Wall was built on a lottery. So obviously there's revenue raising capability here. And so in each of your states, what does that revenue go for? Is it like earmarked, or does it go to a general fund so that the people could have a better idea as to who the actual beneficiaries are when they game? And I'll lead off with, why don't we lead off with you if you don't mind, Michelle?
Sorry. Yeah, so in Ohio, it has been designated by law that all profits from the Ohio lottery go to what's called the Lottery Profits Education Fund. And that fund then is used by what was then the Ohio Department of Education, but which is now the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce Development, to then they decide how that fund is going to be given to the school districts in all 88 counties. So some states have it where it goes to a scholarship fund. Other states have it where it goes to other issues other than education, but we're a percentage of that overall education budget. And we make up anywhere between 12 to 14% of the overall education budget.
Has that number been relatively stable over time?
So each year, and last year we had a record transfer of $1.46 billion into that Lottery Profits Education Fund. And so that number is set by the General Assembly down in Columbus, and that is a number that we have to hit every year. So I think this year it's been set for 1.48 billion. So I think we're on track to meet that, and hopefully we'll continue to be able to do so.
Well, at least we now know what keeps you awake at night.
Yes.
In
I
that
would-
regard, what about John? What about your state? Where does this money go?
When the Maryland Lottery began in 1973, education was its primary beneficiary. That changed. And legislators can do that. They've been known to do that in certain jurisdictions. They change their mind and redirect it. So today, our funds that they have been for the last several years, the majority of our time in existence, go to the state's general fund. We are a state agency. So every year at the end of the fiscal year, we hand over and transfer revenues to the state's general fund, and from there it serves a multitude of programs: public health, public safety, environment, education to some degree. But recently, we've become also regulators of the casino gaming and sports wagering business here in Maryland, and those entities also have specific funds designated as beneficiaries. The Education Trust Fund for the casino gaming partners that we regulate, and the Blueprint for Maryland's Future Fund, also an education fund. So it's not for lack of people looking for funding sources. We have plenty of those. And annually, most recently, fiscal 23, we delivered $1.5+ billion to our good causes. So you can see there's a lot of money to be made in the lottery and a lot of good causes that benefit from that.
Mark, how about you? And you can,
Sure.
if you want to, if there are differences, because you've been in a variety of different places, so you might have seen different strategies in different spaces.
Yeah, I'll start with, I appreciate the point. I'll start with what we do in North Carolina. So in North Carolina, the sole beneficiary from lottery revenue is public education. Now, we as the lottery do not determine how that money is spent. We raise the money. It's up to the General Assembly to decide where within the educational system that money goes. And it varies from year to year. And a lot of it is for school construction, for example. We have 100 counties in North Carolina. In any given year, so we raised a little over $1 billion for education last year. And that helped build brand new schools in a number of counties here, schools that hadn't been updated or had been built in the 50s or 60s, literally falling apart and crumbling, and suddenly they have a brand new school. So that's something we're pretty proud of. We also fund support staff at schools. So not teachers, there's a big point to be made here. We do not fund teacher salaries, but we fund bus drivers, custodians, cafeteria staff, support staff in general. We also fund college scholarships. And we also, very importantly, and then I think this was actually quite brilliant on the part of the legislature here, we fund pre-K education for what we call at-risk 4-year-olds. So some that grow up in very difficult circumstances, they get to go to school free of charge as preschool. And I think that's really an important stepping stone for them to get onto a better educational platform. Much like John, we also have something beyond our normal traditional lottery business here. Just started a little over a month ago. Actually in March, we are now responsible for sports wagering in the state of North Carolina. We started, not coincidentally, the day before the ACC basketball tournament. If you know anything about North Carolina, you know we're a basketball state. It's taken off. We have a very different role, though. In the lottery, we run the business, much like a commercial enterprise of any sort. We're in the sales business, we're in the product development business, and all the rest of it. In the sports betting space, we are a regulator solely. So we have licensed a number of private enterprises to conduct all of that business. So we have to wear sort of two hats. And the important distinction there is with sports betting, the beneficiary is the general fund. So again, we have no say over how that money is used, but it goes into the general fund, unlike lottery money, which goes solely for education.
Thanks. I think one of the interesting things that lives in sort of the entire lottery space is it plays a valuable support role in a lot of different areas, and it doesn't require anybody to think of paying higher taxes at some level, which then has some benefits in that particular space.
And just to add one point to that, Dr. Falke, we talked about education being a primary beneficiary for the three of us. Well,
sure.
Used to be for John, but now is the general fund. But other states have very different beneficiaries. So to give you an example, like Colorado, for example, it's public parks, state parks and recreation. In Pennsylvania, it's elderly assistance, aid for elderly people and things like that. So each state has its sort of own beneficiary. It just so happens that education is one of the primary ones across the country.
And then
Thanks.
the other thing
sorry.
I'll mention, because I think it was John who mentioned that they were a state agency, as is in Ohio. Mark, are you a state agency?
We are technically a state agency, but the legislature actually had a good day when they passed the lottery legislation, unusually so. They exempted us from almost every single state regulation. So we're exempt from the Administrative Procedures Act. Basically, we run it as a private enterprise, although technically we are a public entity. I think of it as a private enterprise with one shareholder, which is the state.
So that's the interesting thing, Dr. Welke, is that you have lotteries that are designated as state agencies, and like I am here at the, the will of the governor, and we're under certain rules and regulations, but you've got other lotteries that are run more like private businesses. So it's different to see the different models that are out there.
Gotcha.
And on that point, and to your point, Michelle, I was not a political appointee. In fact, I'm quite the opposite. I'm the most apolitical person you're ever going to meet. And I'm hired by our board, just like I was in private enterprise. So we operate quite exempt from most government regulations here.
Just for the record, Mark, we're going to edit out that comment about the legislature having a good day.
Yeah, well, they have one every now and again, but it's okay.
Okay, but we'll do our best to chop that.
Okay.
I guess what I'd like to hear, it was mentioned a little bit earlier, how is technology changing things in your space? Maybe changing the demographics of the audience, or the way that delivery games or the kind of games they're looking for? Because you guys have seen careers from no phones to muck or something put on these cardboard things that I heard described earlier.
So in Ohio, I think we were the first lottery to go completely cashless on our self-service stations. So it's always been interesting for me now that I travel in this position, when I go look at other machines in other states, that you can't use a credit card on them, as opposed to you have to use cash. Now, I will say that our credit cards are, they have a limit as to how much money you can spend on that credit card in the course of a day, in the course of a week, things like that. So that's one piece of technology that we have. And then we use a lot of analytics with our Scratch vendor partner, in taking a look at what scratch games should be in certain retailers in certain areas of the state. Do $30 tickets perform better over here? Should we fill the bins with $5 tickets? So there is a method to the madness that happens behind the scenes.
I would say the technology, Dr. Welke, really is most evidenced at the player intersection. As I said earlier, scratch tickets really haven't changed in 50 years. Powerball ticket is a Powerball ticket. That hasn't changed much, but it's a delivery mechanism. Mark and I are dinosaurs. The world is to people like Michelle and the younger kids out there who use phones and engage in that in everything they do. And it shows in our player profiles. If you have to be where the players are, and the players now are on mobile and digital technology, and each of us in all of our lotteries struggle with that migration from a very dated delivery system, a dated product, and trying to appeal for mind share and the player's share of wallet, digital as it may be, to engage with them. And that's why I think you've seen such a big run on sports wagering. It is purely a mobile platform. 97% of people who engage in sports wagering around the country are doing it on their phone. And if lotteries want to continue for another 50 years, they're going to have to think of a way to do that. And a lot of times that's a legislative issue. It's not because Mark and Michelle and I don't want to do it, it very much kind of is that that legislative impetus to get us over that hump. And very few lotteries today, very few jurisdictions today have yet to make that move. But I think they all would recognize that technology has got to take us there.
Yeah, I'm just going to follow on what John said. I mean, in all of our states, and the three of us, and also I think across the country, retail locations are our bread and butter, but they have been, as John said and Michelle said, for 50 years. I mean, people got used to the idea of going to the convenience store, the grocery store, whatever, and buying your lottery ticket. Over the last decade, I would say, in the more progressive states, and certainly in the last 2 or 3 years, in some that took a little longer to get there, they have started to migrate toward what I'm calling the online platforms, and that includes mobile phone, playing on your computer, and things like that. We had an online platform here in North Carolina for the last 7 or 8 years, but we were selling a limited number of products. So you could register an account and buy a Powerball ticket or a Mega Millions ticket or whatever online. Just recently, we moved to this area, which I mentioned a moment ago, called digital instants, which are a much more engaging, interactive type of process. You're not just buying a number, you're actually watching displays of various types that are much more engaging for players. And so we just migrated to that because it was a politically, I'll say, controversial area for a while.
Sure. Sure.
Our sales have gone off the charts. We just started this 6 months ago, and in those 6 months, the sales are incredible. And part of the reason is players like the fact that they can engage, they can reinvest their winnings. It's not a one-time transaction. So it's a process, it's an experience, I'll use that term, as opposed to simply buying a ticket. The important part of that is not only is it allowing us to get more play and get more people involved, it's allowing us to reach a younger, and as I mentioned before, more technologically savvy player base. The lottery industry has been around and hasn't changed fundamentally for decades. Retail and all the rest are always going to be there, but to be honest, the players are aging, as am I. And so we have to bring in new players. And I'll tell you, I've got kids who are like in their late 20s. They wouldn't dare walk into retail and buy a ticket. That's just not their thing. They don't go to the grocery store. They have things delivered. The Amazon guy lives at their house. I mean, that's the way things work. And so the idea of going to a mobile platform, as John said, is absolutely the wave of the future. And some states have had the ability to go do that, and others are constrained legislatively. But that's really where the growth area is going forward.
Well, I thought it was fascinating because most people, old school like myself, would think of the purchase as being just a transaction. I go and I get something. And what you're speaking of is the industry is evolving to make it more of an experience, because that's where your current audience or where your future audience is going to be.
Absolutely.
I want to thank the three of you for sharing so much about how your systems work. I'm going to turn it back over to Rory at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Welke. Bravo. And thank you to our panel. I'm going to ask the final question here, and then we've got a few viewer questions we're going to get to, because I want to keep this relatively close to an hour. For the three of you, and we'll start with Michelle, what is something you learned at John Carroll, or a lesson you learned, and that has served you well in your career in the gaming industry? Because we're always eager to learn what alumni take from their John Carroll education. They find it stays with them going forward. So Michelle, why don't you tee us up first?
Well, I'll apply it not only to my career in gaming, which is only a year old, but to my career in general and in life, is that, John Carroll, I think, is known for service and service to others. And I think it has taught me that valuable lesson that no matter who you have an opportunity to interact with, whether it's a high member of government, a CEO, or the individual that helps, clean the offices that we're in, that we always just want to treat each other with dignity and respect. And so, if I didn't know that going into John Carroll, which I knew, but it helped solidify, that moral compass that we all should have.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. John, how about you?
I think the thing that's resonated with me, Rory, over the years is the advantage I had at John Carroll was learning the characteristics and the traits of being a good leader. And when I had the chance, you opened up the conversation tonight talking about Arch Gleason. I did have an opportunity about 10, 12 years ago to actually spend some time with Arch one-on-one. And he didn't need to give me the time. But in that brief exchange, I saw in him leadership. It's something that's resonated with me then. It continues to be in my everyday job today is, and just look at it, regardless of the industry, you know, John Carroll students are leaders, and they are because of the foundation and the things they learned, not only at college, but in the rest of their lives and the other shared experience with other alumni. So I'm happy today to be a part of the conversation. And that's been the biggest takeaway for me.
Mark.
I'll add on to the two things that John and Michelle said. And I was thinking about this before. One of the things I learned was to be inquisitive. You never stop learning. Now, I've been in the gaming industry for 47 years. I learn every single day, and I'm not exaggerating. I learn from my colleagues. I learn from our customers. I learn from our employees. I learn from supplier companies in the industry. Always ask the next question. Be inquisitive. Learn more. Want to know more. Don't ever think you know everything, because you don't. And that's something that I think the professors at John Carroll all taught all of us was there's always more. Dig deeper. Don't be satisfied with an okay answer, because there's always more to learn. So be inquisitive.
I guess what I would add to yours, Mark, is it's obvious that Kathy Barber has her fingerprints all over you.
Yeah, she was the best, man. I'll tell you, I think of her a lot, and I am very grateful for having had the opportunity to work with her. She was amazing.
So I think we got time for two questions. We had a couple come through, and the ones that we weren't able to ask, we'll distribute them to the panel here. We'll maybe get answers after the fact. But the first one was, just a short answer from each of you if you have an immediate answer. What has sports gambling impacted in terms of the games in your state? Scratch offs, this particular game, this particular contest. What have you seen the numbers been affected mostly by the introduction of sports gambling in your states? I guess we'll start with Mark here.
Yeah, it's too early to tell. To be honest, we just literally started about 6 weeks ago. So we don't know what the overall impact is going to be on lottery right now. We're continuing to grow in both areas, but it is something we're concerned about. Is it going to take away from lottery? And we just don't have enough experience yet. So I'll leave it at that.
John.
We've had a little bit more experience, so we do have enough data. It really has not impacted our traditional lottery players as much, because it's a different type of player. It's really coming from people who have been maybe participating in the illegal sports wagering market, and now they're migrated to a legal regulated market. And that's where we're seeing more of the impact there, is bringing people in within a regulated market and not really seeing it at the expense of any of our traditional lottery products.
Okay.
So here in Ohio, we've had sports gaming a little over a year now, and where we're seeing the biggest impact is in Keno. So Keno is a game that you can play at bars and restaurants, and the type of individual that typically plays that is a male between the ages of 23 and 45, which is the same demographic that's doing sports betting. And so when you're sitting at the bar holding one of these and you get an offer from, FanDuel or DraftKings that you place a bet for $5 and we're going to give you $100 and some in bonus play, well, you only have so much money to go around. I think some of that money is shifting over to the phone for sports betting away from Keno.
Gotcha. Okay. Fascinating. And the last question is, I'm intrigued by the answers here because it's directed at John. John, one of our viewers has noticed your Browns hat on your bookshelf back there. And this is an actual question. I see a Browns hat back there. What would your advice be for betting on them this season? Now, I don't know as a public figure you can answer that question, but this is an actual question. And with a Cleveland-centric audience, I figured I would at least transmit it. So
Thank you. The Browns hat is in between the Cavaliers 2016 champions hat and the Guardians hat. So you can take the boy out of Cleveland. You take Cleveland out of the boy. That's the thing. And please bet with your head, not with your heart. That would be my advice to anyone.
Very, very well done, John. Very well done. Well, I want to thank our panel. I want to thank Dr. Welke for administrating the part here. Thanks for Luke Petoskey, who's our alumni engagement specialist, for helping facilitate the tech side of this. Thank you for everyone who was able to join. Just as before we depart here, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. And I just want to share my screen one more time here. I'm gonna do it real quick. I want to make sure everyone sees that, this is a photo here from a time when Mark and John and Michelle met at a conference, and just look at the smiles on their face, right? And I love sharing this photo. They shared with us ahead of the program. This is what happens when Carroll alumni see each other out in the wild, but most importantly, when you see each other in the same industry, we love seeing this. So for those out there, just, take pride in that this is another industry like the NFL, the accounting industry, the healthcare industry, dentistry. This is another industry where John Carroll alumni have gone in and made a huge impact. So I share that with pride. We share their story with pride. We thank our panelists tonight, and we thank everyone for staying engaged with John Carroll University. So have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for joining, and onward on. We'll see you.
Thanks
everyone.
all.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.